Hello everyone and welcome to Spilling the Tea. We have an extra special setup today with two wonderful guests from Workiva. So we're going to be talking about breaking barriers today. Thank you ladies for taking the time out of your busy days to come down and have a chat with Spilling the Tea. Ladies, I'm going to hand over to you for a bit of context. I have the wonderful Rebecca and Francesca with me today, and they're going to share their journey into leadership and all about their careers so far. So I'm going to hand over to you. Francesca, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much for having us as well. I'm Francesca Van Oss. I lead our partnerships team in Europe at Workiva. Been with Workiva for almost 11 years since we started in Europe. So sort of a range of roles across the company that led to partnerships, which I started the team in about 2017. So really been leading it since then, taking on a bit more of a sort of structured leadership role over the last few years. And been working with Rebecca for a long time as well.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. So my name's Rebecca Wallace. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success and Support for Workiva here in Europe. So I've been at Workiva a little bit less time than Francesca, a little over 9 years. One of the original customer success managers in Europe after Francesca. Really had the opportunity to grow in my career there, moving into a team manager role, taking over customer success for Europe. And then more recently, within the last year or so, taking over support as well, which has been a great challenge, really interesting ride. But yeah, really great career opportunity and growth I think we've both had at Workiva. So really looking forward to discussing that further with you today.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time out. As I said, I know you both from those roles there, you're both super busy. Can I ask you a little bit about your backgrounds? Did you fall into tech? Did you know what you wanted to do? Did you take apart the toaster as a child? Were you that child? What did you do?
I think that's always the funny thing, that when you tell friends that or your families, I think we always joke that none of our families really know exactly what we do. Mm-hmm. But I think for a lot of people at Workiva, a lot of us don't have a tech background, and I think that's what has always made it really interesting. There's sort of so many nationalities that we work with and so many different backgrounds that sort of adds colour to it. But I did languages, and I went to Amsterdam when I graduated, looked for a job, and this American company was looking for a native English speaker as a second person to be hired in Europe. We were a big American company. We were starting in Europe. They were looking for an English speaker to be on the support side. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what software is. Sounds great. I'd love to do that. and just sort of, literally fell into it, like you said. And I think a lot of people came at it that way. So that was really my first job out of university. So slightly different to Rebecca, but
yeah, I've been in a couple of tech-related companies or roles. Although growing up, I never knew exactly what I wanted to do. Always really enjoyed working with people and helping people. I actually studied psychology at university, but when I graduated, it was during the economic crisis, so kind of difficult to find a job back then. But I found myself in an e-commerce payments position at a company called WorldPay prior to Workiva, and I started there on the support team. So I was really interested in learning more about tech, and just that space is really fast-paced and very exciting. There's always new developments, and that's something that really intrigued me and really interested me. I actually moved to the Netherlands, where I'm still located now, because my ex-partner got offered a job opportunity over there. So I've been at WorldPay for a few years. I was ready for a change. I actually quit that job, moved to the Netherlands, and I found Workiva back then through a recruitment agency that we used to work with that specialise in expat recruitment.
Yeah, like multinational, yeah.
And found the job through there. I saw the job posting. I thought, that's perfect for me. The company sounds really exciting. It was very much in the startup phase in Europe, which also really interested me to be a part of something new, building something from the beginning. And then, fortunately, went for the interview, was successful. I remember they used to give us, during the interview, we had to actually do a practice question on the platform. So you got to see during the interview process a sneak peek into the platform, which was really cool. And I think that interested me even further to think, hey, this actually looks like a really cool technology, a really cool platform, something I really want to be a part of. And I think the rest was history from there. Sort of the journey began really at Workiva, and haven't looked back since, really.
No. Yeah, incredible. It's lovely to hear as well that both of you don't come from a traditional computer science background, and the ladies in Cheek and Coast community just love to hear that you don't have to be techie, and even when you do come in, you don't have to pick up a techie role, and that there's just so much opportunity. And I love the fact as well that you mentioned that you wanted to go into a startup, and and that environment, and how much fun a startup can be, and that that also takes a certain person, doesn't it?
I think because I've got some friends that it may be a bit more risk averse, and sort of I always say, like, just take the plunge if that's interesting to you, because we went from, we had a parent company that was much bigger in the US to having a sort of startup scale up mentality over here. But it was a real camaraderie right from the start, because you're all in it together, and you'd want to like stay up late and help with things. And we didn't have the dev support we have now. Like now we have 24-hour dev support, which is amazing. And we, since that started years ago, but at the time we all would go outside of our roles helping each other. And there was that real sense of community. And like we still have that now, but we're over, I think, 600 people in Europe now. So we've really seen it grow over the last 11 years. So it's really fun to be a part of it since the start.
Yeah, great story to not just for your CV, but to say that you were a part of that great story. That's really nice. And we're going to talk a little bit about being a woman in leadership today. Can you both share a little bit about your experience so far, stepping into a leadership role and being a woman in leadership in tech? What has that been like? Rebecca, should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So something I think throughout my career and even during school, I'd always lacked a little bit of confidence. So for me, like having someone that can champion you and encourage you to help you take that confidence to take that step has been really important. So I was very fortunate to have a previous manager, a previous boss who, when the opportunity arose, he really like advocated for me and said, I think you'd be fantastic for this, really great career development opportunity. And I think without him and really an ally to women in leadership, I don't think I would be where I am today. So I think that's something that I think is really important, and I try and foster and nurture within our own team, is to really speaking up for women. And I think that really helped give me that step up to then continue to grow, and it helps you with just building more of that confidence as well. Like, I can do this. And I think once you've got a little bit of those successes under your belt, I think that helps to continue to build your confidence as well. So really that was how I got into leadership, just through someone really encouraging me and supporting me, which I really am very grateful for.
Yes, and having that sponsor sometimes that is there saying great things about you when you're not in the room, that kind of encourages you in the end to, you're finally thought of as that leader because somebody has said something about you behind closed doors. You get that promotion. I agree with the confidence thing. So many ladies that we have on the podcast have all said, when you first step into a leadership role, you're expected to know everything. And they said it's such a panic because you don't have to know everything. Your team are there to know everything, and between everybody you function and as a really great team. But I think it's that worry, everyone's going to think I need to know everything, and that's where the confidence thing steps in, and eventually those ladies say, you know what, after I calm down a little bit and realise I don't have to know everything, you kind of settle into your own leadership style. Is that kind of
you
your
just
experience?
want to hire great talent and be able to have great people working with you. I fell into leadership in a slightly different way because I started the partnerships team in about 2017. I was working in a pre-sales, post-sales kind of environment and sort of reached my limit there, I think. It's a lot of traveling at the time. And I saw that the US had started partnerships. So that's working with advisory firms to bring business to us rather than us selling directly to the customer, which is our model for that, 8 years until that point. And so I said, well, can I experiment a little bit with this? I think it'd be quite fun not fun, but a lot of work to go and do this. And they said, yeah, give it a go, see what happens. And that started up our relationships with advisory firms, what we call partnerships. And it's another way of bringing business to Workiva. And so sort of took on like a de facto leadership role in that I was the only person doing it to start with. And then we hired some more people in and you start managing them. So sort of took on that leadership role, sort of developed quite naturally, and then started, I guess for me it was a bit harder to have a seat at the table initially because partnerships was a new organisation, it hadn't been around. It was also initially a bit of a challenge with sales. There had been a direct sales model. We're coming in from the side helping with sales, but it's also seen if some people felt like it was competitive. And so having that seat at the table and saying, well, no, I'm really here to help you with your sales business. And I think a lot of peers I speak to in other companies with alliances have that too. But so over the years, it wasn't necessarily that there was people to, encourage you to come in, but it was you earned your place. So being able to show consistently good results meant that, okay, actually, this is becoming a firm part of the organisation. And then that sort of earned me my seat at the table.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as well, being ladies that work in tech, I mean, you mentioned a few challenges there. I wanted to dig into that a bit. Have you, I mean, it's no secret that the tech industry is very male dominated. Yeah. Have you experienced any challenges between you when you stepped into leadership? I mean, obviously not at Workiva, you stayed there for, for a long period of time, but have you experienced anything like that along the way?
I mean, I think we've had quite different journeys, with Francesca being more on the commercial side, myself being more on sort of the product and support and success side. Unfortunately, I think the environment has been very supportive and encouraging to women leaders. However, I've definitely found myself in situations where I've looked around and it's all just been myself and white males. And I'm like, oh, okay, like this feels a little bit uncomfortable, being like, you're very aware that you're very different being there. But then again, it helps give you that confidence that I can bring something different.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I bring diversity, and I can really use my voice here to speak up for maybe others that are unrepresented and a different perspective. So I think that's something that you learn and develop over time to build more into, and to lean into your natural strengths. But it can feel uncomfortable when you see you're the only woman. But I suspect you have that a little bit more than I do, Francesca.
Yeah, definitely the situation where you're the only face on that call or in that meeting. I work in sales, and so not only is women
already male dominated, yeah,
it's a very, very male dominated space, and I think also it possibly comes with a stereotype of what people in sales are like, and then a stereotype of what women in sales are like. And obviously, I didn't start in sales. I started in customer success, and then in consulting, and then into sales. So I like to think that I came at it with a cross-lateral empathy that came from the other departments and being able to work with them. And that was the strength that I could bring to the table, was my relationships with the other departments and with our US counterparts. But one of the challenges that is that the natural, I guess, directness and assertiveness you have to have in sales, you have quarterly quotas, you have an annual target, you've got to drive results. And with that comes the need to be pushy at times, the need to be direct. But it comes with the stereotypes that that's not female or that's not feminine.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to balance that with, I think, like Rebecca said, lean into the qualities that you have and be able to bring something slightly different. But gosh, I think everyone could probably speak to this, is the amount of times that I was called aggressive or, there's quite an aggressive approach to that email. It's like, is it? Or was it just me being a bit direct because there's things to be done here and there's targets to be met? So I think that there's probably my biggest challenge has been probably the labels given or to certain behaviours that had a male counterpart said or done the same thing, that there might have been a softer label given to them. So probably a little bit around that narrative. And I think there's huge strides that all companies have made in the right direction towards combating that. And it's so much in the media and everything that really helps with it. But that was probably definitely the situations I would be in, where you're in a room full of males, whether it's in the consulting side that I work in partnerships or in our sales team. It's very often you're the only female face there.
Yeah.
But like Rebecca said, you have an advantage as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So
and good companies,
that
good companies notice that, don't they? That they want a diverse team for that reason. And you're absolutely right, Rebecca, that you can lean into that and really use your skills there. I'm wondering as well, I mean, you're talking about sales there and occasionally people will think you're aggressive. How did you find your own leadership style? Because if all of your managers previously, for instance, were men, did you find you were emulating those men, and then perhaps when you got into your leadership role you thought, you know what, I don't have to be like that, or maybe I do have to be like that? Because you are right, it is sales and you do need to get things done.
I think that's a really interesting point, and both Rebecca and I mentor people, and we can talk about mentoring in a second, but I always think now that I've been in leadership longer, the piece of advice that I then give to other people is, what kind of leader do you want to be? If someone said, Rebecca, talking about Rebecca as a leader, what's the the kind of words and terminology you want them to think about you? How do you want to come across? So I think much like a bit like parenting, you sort of pick the bits that you probably admired from your parents and learnt as you grew up. Well, which parts of other leaders do you admire and do you pick up? And it's probably pieces from different parts. So for example, when I was in pre-sales, I had a really good sales manager who was advocating for me and was a really good coach. And he would come into the room and be like, I'm literally here because I'm a male with grey hair and Francesca's going to do all the talking. And they'd be like, oh, okay. But I wouldn't have got in that room if he wasn't there.
Yeah.
Because I was a young female and it was... And it's not necessarily just because you're a female, but I think also age came into it as well. And so sometimes you just needed that person to advocate for you. But then when it comes to being a leader now, I think Rebecca and I took part in a women leadership training that Workiva provided, which was fantastic, in 2021. And part of that was we were writing on a board all the qualities of leaders and the typical words you'd expect: powerful, assertive, like all these words. And then the coach just turned to us and said, what do you think's missing? And we're like, where's kindness?
Yeah.
And
Empathy.
empathy,
Big one.
and compassion. And it was just almost ingrained in us from growing up and experiencing other leaders that you have to be fearless and you have to be strong and assertive. And yes, those are types of leaders, but I don't think that we'd necessarily had our own examples of leading with kindness so openly and letting your guard down and being vulnerable and all those sort of things. And we decided in that room that we were going to be those leaders, that we'd, creating this new type of leadership, I guess.
And I think that can be maybe a mistake or something that earlier on in your career as a leader, you feel like you have to sort of copy the examples that you've had or fit into a mold, but then you run the risk of losing your personality and your true self, and then you're not really leading with authenticity. Yeah. So I think it really is about identifying like what are your strengths and how can you lean into those more. But similarly to Francesca, like I think I try and take what I like and love in other leaders that I've had, and like at times of self-doubt, like even like a great leader I had earlier on in my career, previous company, who I'm still in touch with now, I'll sometimes think to myself, what would Liz do in this situation? So I think that can also give you confidence, right? And it's someone that was very, very business savvy, but cared a lot about people, cares a lot about the customer. And that's something that I can fall back into, but I try and take bits and pieces of what I really love in others. And I think in my world, I think we're very lucky to have incredible female leaders at Workiva in very senior positions in C-suite. So that's also helped create more space for future female leaders. So I think representation and strong role models is incredibly important because they can help advocate for other aspiring female leaders. And it's about really passing that down and passing the baton. And that incredible opportunity that we had to be involved in this leadership training. Something else that I really took a lot of value from was identifying like what are your core values and staying true to those. And I think that really helps you during times of uncertainty or change or conflict, like really just coming back to that. And I think that is, again, I think a theme for me is like it gives you that confidence to move forward and progress, even in times of adversity as well.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. I love the fact as well you use the word authentic, because you're right. Between what both of you just said there, if you're that person that thinks, I have to mirror the person before me, that might have been a man. Francesca, you used the word powerful, and you almost think you have to come in, you have to be the loudest, you have to speak the loudest, perhaps in that meeting room, and then people just know it doesn't seem authentic. And if your team doesn't think you're authentic, they're not going to back you. They're not going to get behind you. And you're right, especially in times of conflict. That is so important. Such good advice. And it's brilliant as well that you can say that you have those role models internally as well, and that you're not just looking for them across the industry, but you have them internally, because it's something at She Can Code we advocate for is that change has to come from the top down. And if you don't see it from your own management team, and you don't see great examples there, then it's incredibly hard to try and change company culture. And
I mean, we're really fortunate that a lot of those leaders give us their time as well, and that they're really wanting to be good mentors and provide mentorship programs. And then you as a newer leader in your career you're like, right, well, I would say to Rebecca, is there anyone on your team that you would like me to mentor? Because I think that cross-organization mentoring really allows people to open up a lot more. If you're like, is it going to go upwards? We're talking, and also having someone that doesn't know the ins and outs of your organization, so they can provide a different perspective. So one of Rebecca's senior leaders at C-level was my mentor for a year, And so it's a once a month meeting that she would help me. And it was during a time there was a lot of change in the company, and she did wonders for my self-confidence. But also we didn't really know each other beforehand. So then getting to know each other and then her being able to advocate for me and give me a bigger voice internationally was amazing. And so then, like Rebecca was talking about paying it forwards, you sort of embody that and you're like, right, I'm going to pay it forwards and do it with someone else. And it doesn't have to be female to female, it can be male to female. It can work in both directions. But I think mentoring and coaching are both at different times in your career and in different formats. I think they're fantastic if an organisation can provide that and support that.
So powerful. Yeah, I agree. And I think it also helps you build more of your network, support network, gives you a bigger perspective, because maybe you learn about different parts of the business that you wouldn't typically be so closely working with. So that's really helpful from a career development perspective as well. And just bouncing ideas off someone that isn't so close to your day-to-day, as you said, can also be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yes. I love the fact that you have touched upon mentorship. It is, I completely agree. It's so important. I agree as well that the fact that you're saying about, finding ladies internally that can help you, but also externally is so important, getting a good mix. Because you're right, somebody that is not there in your day-to-day, maybe not even in your company, can give a completely different skew on things and where they think your strengths lie compared to, somebody internally that sometimes can get very bogged down in the politics of your company. So finding different mentors from different parts of the industry is fantastic. A lot of our ladies tend to ask on our live webinars, where can they find a mentor? Because if you're not blessed with lots of wonderful women within your company, how can our listeners think, well, I feel a little bit awkward reaching out to someone, or maybe they're not confident at a networking event? Like, do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it doesn't have to be a female as well. So one of the best mentors I've had at Workiva was a male in the US in a different department. I think it's about being self-aware about where your own gaps are and what am I actually looking for, because as a mentor, it makes it a lot easier to understand and to quickly get to, let me try and help you and coach you, is around understanding, well, what is it that you want to work on, or rather than just going in with a completely blank canvas. Yeah. So I would say to anyone that's listening and wondering about how to find a mentor, to go about it, is to think first, what do I want to achieve, or what are my gaps? What am I looking to do? Is it that I need more confidence building? Is it that I want to be able to have stronger conversations in X area? And then looking for those people. I've reached out to people on LinkedIn who are either quite an advocate and have quite a vocal voice about certain things. They might have written a particular blog, and I'll say to them, would it be all right if we had a conversation? And then people think mentoring needs to be like a monthly thing. It can also just be a one-off conversation that will literally change your life. Or it could be a quarterly conversation. So I think going in with, you need to agree that with that mentor. And so if you're worried about it being a burden on that person, then it's just saying, could we just have a one-off conversation? And when you have that conversation, sometimes that leads to something more.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it coming across as a burden, because often they'll learn from you as well. Yes. So they also find the relationship equally valuable. I'm a part of another leadership program at Workiva at the moment, and we had a great opportunity to be assigned a mentor as a part of that program. And rather than just being assigned one directly, my manager, my boss now, was like, well, who do you want, to your point, who do you want to work with? Who do you look up to? And because I think senior leaders, women leaders, are quite underrepresented at Workiva in Europe, I was really looking across the organisation. And there was like maybe 3 or 4 women, which I didn't know a lot about, but had really good reputation, really stood out to me. And I just mentioned it to my manager, and he went and had a conversation with them and asked on my behalf, would you be open? And they were more than happy. So that's another way that you can do, if you don't have the confidence, if you're unsure, if you've got a manager or someone more senior that maybe can advocate on your behalf, that's another path that you can go down. But I would say, don't hold back. And if there's someone that you really admire and look up to, I'm sure they would love to hear from you. And they will also get value out of that relationship as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's an eye-opener, isn't it? Sometimes you think, actually, people are willing to help. It's literally just you asking. People are not mind readers. And most of the time, they love the fact that you've reached out to them to say, actually, could you help me with something? I found as well those conversations, especially when you're not in leadership and you speak with ladies in leadership, you take them in and you go, oh, that kind of makes sense. And then actually years later, their words will come back to you and suddenly it will dawn on you. And it could be 10 years later and you think, oh, I get it. That's why that lady was saying that. So even now, those conversations you have now, they really can be life-changing, but they might not settle in maybe
we were talking about this last night at dinner. And I said one of the most influential people to me was when I was 23, when I first joined Workiva. And it was actually a client of ours. And I was on an offsite project, and I think she's amazing. And I looked up on LinkedIn actually, and I'm probably going to reach out to her again and say how influential she was. And honestly, to her, it was probably the smallest piece of advice she gave me. But we were in a situation where there was quite strong characters in sales, and at the time I was in support and I was there helping set up something. And we'd walk into the room, and this quite old-fashioned seller would say, okay, well, Francesca, you go sit over there in the corner and we'll sit at the table. And after a bit, we were there for quite a while, and so she took me to lunch one day and said, so is he your boss? And I said, no, he's a peer of mine. She goes, well, why does he talk to you like that? She goes, I'm gonna do something. So we walked into the room after lunch, and he said, okay, well, Francesca, off you go, sit over there. And she goes, no, actually, I'd like her to come and sit at the table right here with me. And she pulled a chair out beside her. And this is a very senior person at this bank. And she literally brought me to the table in that sort of metaphorical sense. And then from then on, she was like referring to me, turning to me, saying, what do you think? And pulled me into conversation with all these very high level people, but gave me that confidence that I do have a voice, actually. It doesn't matter my age and what my role is. And it's, you try to embody that and you try to do that. So, 11 years on, I still think of her as how influential she was to me. And that you pass
do
it forward
to someone else.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Definitely. You are right. There are certain people along the way you don't realise
the impact they have on your life.
No. And I think I do the same thing, and I think of certain managers later down the line and think, oh, you know what, that boss, and in the end you think, I really love that boss, because they didn't say a lot. They're almost elusive. But that meant that they didn't give much away and everybody respected them. And then as you start to move into leadership, I started to think of him and thought, actually, sometimes it is best just to say less. But it wasn't until years later that I suddenly started to think of different types of leadership along the way. And you don't quite realise at the time, or that tiny thing that happens can be so impactful.
No, definitely.
You had a great advocate for you there, who kind of dragged you literally in and sat you down. I wanted to talk a little bit about what organisations can do to foster a supportive environment for women in leadership. Perhaps if you don't have somebody that's supportive within the leadership team, is there anything you think companies can do to try and help that?
Yeah, I mean, we have ally programs as well, and I think if you don't have necessarily the amazing facilities we've had, like the Women in Leadership program and things like that, something like encouraging allies, I think, is something that every organisation can do. And we were talking about this together, about what it actually means to be an ally. An ally can be, and obviously across lots of different groups, but not just saying, yep, I'm a female ally. And It's like, okay, but what does that actually mean? And it means about challenging the narrative. So I mentioned aggressive earlier, and if someone was to say, oh, Francesca's being quite aggressive. Is she being aggressive, or is she being assertive and direct about something? And, the typical, oh, they're being quite emotional about this. Were they being emotional, or were they being passionate? And I think that's the number one thing an ally can do, or for me, is that they can challenge the narrative and change it that way. So you're not telling people, you're doing it inclusively and encouraging. So I think changing language and just small things like that is something an organisation can be supportive of. Yeah. And we've even looked at job descriptions. Were they traditionally written by men and therefore are calling out to men, and will they appeal to women? So looking at language like that.
Agreed. Yeah, inclusive language, I agree, is a big one. And I think it just starts with being conscious of that, and maybe which terms are maybe outdated, and how that can marginalise like an underrepresented group. So that's one thing, just promoting more of that inclusivity with the language and calling each other out, but in a professional and kind way. That's a big one. Agreed. The job descriptions is another. I think having our business employee resource group for women to help create more allies has been really powerful. And just elevating that voice. I think also we spoke a little bit about this earlier, even if there's a woman that's a great leader or a great employee and they're not in the room, still advocate for them and speak up for them even when they're not there. That's a big one. And another great thing that Workiva has explored is just being more, just being diverse to candidates. There might be often times where women are sometimes overlooked for certain positions. Either maybe they've had a gap in their career because they've taken a break to start a family, but these are often like really talented, very high potential, like hungry, very driven women. And we've worked with a company called Every Mother Knows in the Netherlands that actually promotes those returnships to work where maybe women have taken an extended career break. And we've seen a lot of success with that because, again, I think it helps bring more diversity. And there's all that research out there that says more diverse teams are stronger teams and more high performing teams. So it's for the good of the business if you can really promote more of that inclusivity and diversity within your organisation. I think that's so powerful.
Especially with returnships. We hear that so often from our own community, that ladies that are returning to the workplace are usually more loyal. And a lot of ladies that we've spoke to, their mums, they're like, you know what, it's the worst thing to think, oh, I have to move job, or I have to change my routine in the morning, or I've just set up my routine and I can drop this child off there and that child there. And if I were to move jobs and then suddenly I had to have to rethink all of that, a lot of those ladies, they stay put for a long time because of that, and they're very loyal because of it, whereas graduates can sometimes hop around, they'll be with you a year. So sometimes it's this, bridging that gap with those ladies coming back into the workplace, and you've got yourself a fantastic employee.
And just creating an environment where they can also thrive, I think is key. And making sure they've got a good support network. We were talking about like reintegration after maternity leave as well. It's also something that companies can really look at, how they can really help and support women further.
Yeah, I mean, I returned in March from maternity leave, so I feel very passionate about it as well. I think I wasn't as aware of it until it happens to you as well. And so I think, I was aware of what it is to come back and the need for reintegration, and we support people, whether it's medical leave or maternity leave, with a reintegration. But I think that flexibility as well of the hours. So at Workiva, we can work anytime between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. That works with you. You can put blocks in your calendar for family time. So I put blocks saying Oscar time for, afternoon when I want to be able to spend time with him to do dinner and bath and bed. I don't want to miss out on those moments. And then if I'm needed in the evening, that's my choice. I want to jump back on because it's quiet and I can get some things done. Yep. But that's a choice that I've made, and I feel in control of my calendar, and I feel that I'm trying to get the best blend I can with a work-life balance, but allow that flexibility. And I think we do have a very good appreciation for people's personal time, whether it's to do with family or not. But the reintegration, we've introduced recently a staggered return from maternity leave. So, which basically means you just don't just throw people straight back into it, because your brain's been out of action for a little bit. It's gone through a difficult time, to then come back into it and not have to feel, you're talking earlier around having to feel like you need to be there and confidence wise, but being able to give yourself that time to come back into it and build back up to where you were.
Yeah. Yes, I'm so pleased you mentioned that. I had a question I wanted to ask you about balancing work. I think some, especially mums or people that got other commitments, they do worry, don't they? When you step into a leadership role, are you going to be asked, too much of you? Can you do it?
Yeah.
It's great that you have a staggered program for that as well, coming back in. How have you found that, both as leaders? Have you found it difficult once you stepped into leadership to then kind of set those boundaries as well with work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's naturally like the demands of leadership. You always feel like, I don't think we ever feel like our job is ever done. Like there's no sort of, right, I finished my day and tick.
There's always things to do, of course.
You naturally start thinking about it. So you have to have discipline. And that was something that actually an external coach was very good during my pregnancy before I went off for work, because you're used to giving I was 150% to work for 11 years. And then having to basically shut the laptop.
But that's not sustainable.
It's not.
I mean, we all have like peaks and troughs, I think, in our work, in our career. And there are times when maybe it's necessary to go that 100, 110%, but you can't sustain that because that's not healthy.
And sometimes you need someone to tell you to have some discipline, or you need to have it yourself.
Absolutely. And I think also you can fall into that trap if you're, especially earlier on in your career, especially in leadership, that you you really feel like you need to prove yourself. So
Yeah.
you will just work yourself to the bone, but
Yes.
that's not healthy, because then also what kind of example is that setting for your team?
I was going to say, your company doesn't want you to do that
No,
either. They're looking
no.
at you thinking, please.
Absolutely
take a
not.
break.
We've often had time difference problems. So
Yeah.
we're in 3 continents, but here in Europe, there might be times when someone just throws a meeting to your calendar that happens to be 7 till 9 p.m. and probably without realizing that that's actually after hours. So I think being able to set those boundaries, and I think we need to set that example for newer managers, that by the way, you can push back and say, actually, can you move this 2 hours earlier?
Yeah.
Or you make the exception and say, I'm making this an exception, but this isn't actually outside my hours.
Yeah, I think if it's something that you struggle with, and I think some people do find this harder than others, it could be also a personality thing, it could be the environment you're in, is like find an accountability partner.
Yeah.
Or someone, because we've had this where we'll message each other, like Slack each other at work and be like, hey, like, it's 7 p.m, like it's time to log off now.
And also when you should probably take a holiday. Have you used any PTO recently? So we're trying to, part of the leadership thing is we were all encouraging each other to self-soothe, take that bit of time off and actually shut off.
Yes.
And like you said, accountability around when people are on holiday, don't message them, because then you don't want to be messaged when you're on holiday. So hold yourself back. Everything can wait.
Yeah.
Don't, you got to respect that family time, respect that holiday time.
But then I know there are some people who, like, that will actually help reduce their anxiety if, like, they just log on during holiday and check their email. And I think that's fine. If that works for you, totally cool. But that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
So I think it's just knowing your own boundaries. And, I'll book a yoga class at like a certain time on a Friday, because I'm like, no, I'm sticking to this. I'm holding myself accountable. And that's a good way to then unwind and switch off, because then I also know I can be a better employee if I've taken that time to rest and have that downtime and recharge, and then you can come back fully reinvigorated and like ready to take on.
And then I think you can then support those managers in your team. So I have a manager on my team who's returned from maternity leave in September, and so having very recently been through it myself, for example, but she has a different way of working to me. So she doesn't put the blocks in her calendar. And I said, but if you need to make sure you're eating lunch, make sure you get some blocks there in the evening. When she's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, that's fine. I'm not going to push her, because we might work in a different way, but just trying to be able to pass on. So I know that when I returned, God, you take a confidence hit that I never expected. And I think you come into any new job, you would have a confidence hit. But I've been at Workiva 11 years. I wouldn't have expected to have a confidence knock. But the imposter syndrome was on fire when I returned from maternity leave. And just that pressure of like, I need to run this team. I need to be seen to be making an impact straight away. And trying to prove a point. You don't have anyone to prove, but your reputation speaks for yourself, but you put yourself under that pressure. But now I have a whole different respect for that, for other people going through the same thing. And so might reach out to someone else in a different department saying, look, I know you just recently returned. I imagine you must be feeling this if you ever want to talk about it. So I think encouraging, if people are open to it, encouraging people in the organisation to reach out to other peers, whether it's managers, whether it's individuals, just to be able to share your experiences and be. And I think for me, that's what I sort of take away as a woman in leadership, is to owe it to others, to pay it forwards, to be open and vulnerable, maybe where I didn't see that vulnerability before, this image of a woman in leadership needing to be fearless.
Yeah.
But if that isn't you, that's okay. I mean, there will be these women that are fearless, and there'll be ones that are stereotype of powerful and strong, but powerful and strong can come in so many other ways of kindness and openness and vulnerability.
Also,
and
that doesn't work for every team as well. Being that fearless female doesn't work for every team. And I completely agree. It's finding your style and what works, especially if you've come back from leave and then settling into that. I completely agree. I also agree with the fact that you said that you dip in and tell each other, you almost tell each other off when you see, we do that actually, Can Code. We see somebody late online or somebody online when they're on holiday, and we say, get offline, or just somebody will just message like clock off, because it shouldn't be. And I do agree, Rebecca, sometimes it is easier to log on when you're on holiday, or you just think, it's just easier when I come back and check a few things. But all of your team shouldn't feel like they have to be doing that.
That's the important difference there. I agree.
Yes. And the tech world's so fast-paced and fast-moving by nature that you sort of feel like a bit left behind. But it doesn't need to be that way. I mean, everything can wait. People can have a holiday.
Yes.
And the world's not on fire. And so it's just about having that discipline.
I think it also sends a good message that like you trust your team to carry things on in your absence, and I think it helps give people exposure to take on more responsibility and step up. So you can also look at it from that angle as well.
Yeah, I agree. And we spoke a little bit about, things like words like powerful, you're expected to be fearless, or, all of those things that you kind of think of as a leader, but you don't have to be if you're not. Are there any skills that you think are essential for women stepping into leadership that you just think you've picked up along the way and thought, actually, I wish somebody had told me if I just had that skill, that would have made my leadership journey a little bit easier?
I think authenticity, which you talked about, is number
one
one for any leader, is that's what you'll bring to the table. And if you're authentic, it builds trust and it builds openness. And so I think that's a huge one.
I would say empathy
yes
is another really important one. And even, everybody can be a leader in their role. And I think being empathetic is something that will help you in your career, no matter what role you move into, no matter what company. It will help you in your personal life as well, like being a good listener and really trying to see something from another person's perspective. And it's not just internally within your company, it's like your customers or your partners that you're working with as well. I think if everyone could be more empathetic, we would be more productive, and I think the world would be a better place. So I'd say empathy is a key one for me.
Yeah, and I connected to that, it's cross-lateral empathy, which is, you were talking to it around empathy for others. I think it's not just about your organisation and making sure your organisation succeeds. It's about making sure the company succeeds and everyone's brought along with that. And I think cross-lateral empathy, like if my team does this, how does that impact Rebecca's team? How does that impact this other team? If there's a reaction or something you need to support as a leader, an escalation, well, why is that probably happening? What are they probably thinking and going through, and that sort of thing? I think that's something different that we can bring. I think lean into the femininity and lean into those skills that are innate within us that do bring something different, and I think rewrite what the norm is for a leader. I think being a good leader is, the things we've talked about: authenticity, compassion, empathy, vulnerability, and being open. And I think that's what we see more of nowadays is leaders being more open,
more genuine, more authentic.
Yeah, you want to be an open door that people feel they can come to you with their problems and tell you what things are so you can help.
Yeah.
So opening up to the point where you feel comfortable, but opening up.
Because we're all human. We're all going to run into difficult challenges at some point in our lives.
And all make mistakes.
All make mistakes.
Well, and that's the thing, it's how that leader deals with those mistakes.
Yes.
And whether or not you move forward as a team and work together to move past that.
Yeah.
Or if it all just goes entirely wrong, that happens as well. But you're right, showing that you're vulnerable, that you don't have to know everything. You can make a mistake. But it's fine. We moved through it.
I think that's a good point. We talked about this, how it's okay to make mistakes. And we always tell our teams that, and we want them to be open. So we've got to be open ourselves.
It's the best way to learn sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. And we always say, there's no such thing as a silly question. We ask questions ourselves. But I think
it also shows you have to be humble to also admit when you've made a mistake or you don't know something.
Yeah.
And I think naturally maybe women are a little bit more humble, but also that means that we might not speak up about our accomplishments or successes. So you need to make sure you're balancing that as well.
Yeah, I think being the leader that you want or that you wish you had and parts like that, we were saying to each other that leadership can be quite a lonely place.
Yes.
So yes, we've talked about how we look out for each other and we hold each other accountable, but we each run our own organisation, and it can be a very lonely place. So I think for certain, when you first come into leadership, there's probably a lot more of you as managers. And then as you work your way up, it gets a smaller and smaller group. And then when you're leading an organisation, it is very lonely in some ways. And so then you need to, even more than usual, just take the time to spend time with each other and check in on people and how they're going, because they're very likely going to be experiencing very similar pressures to you.
Yeah.
And
you can't share that as well when you're in leadership. Right. That's why I thought of my boss, who just barely said anything, because he was so senior, he couldn't share things.
He's probably going through a lot.
Exactly. You don't want to alarm your team. The more senior, you can't talk about those decisions that are happening, and you think it is incredibly lonely. And you're right, just finding that network to at least share something.
I connect with a peer who leads partnerships at another software company. And I connect with her every so often, and we have, and we sit and we chat, and we have very similar experiences. And so I think it doesn't have to be within the organisation. Right. You can lean out, and you mentioned earlier, like, how do people find a mentor? Well, the same way that you could also lean out to other peers. Whether you go to a networking event or whether it's a friend could introduce you to someone that's like, oh, actually, they did quite a similar job to you. I think people in leadership, no matter the industry, have very similar situations. I mean, my husband's in leadership, and we often converse about, like, what would you do in this situation with this? And it's very similar, completely different industry, but very similar situation you have. So I think that's where we can all help each other, is be a lot more open. And I think probably in years gone by, it was very different. And that's something that can be done differently nowadays.
Yes, definitely. Ladies, I could talk to you for several more hours on this topic. I am disappointed that we only had a few questions to get through today, because you are both a fountain of knowledge about moving into leadership, and I'm sure our ladies are going to find it so interesting to hear your journeys. So thank you so much, Rebecca and Francesca. Thank you so much for coming in, sharing your journeys and life at Workiva. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure for us. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.